Cardiovascular system includes the blood, the heart, and the blood vessels. Let's talk today about blood vessels. The functions of the cardiovascular system are first transportation, and we're transporting oxygen, and that's going to support cellular respiration. We're taking oxygen from the lungs to the cells of the body, particularly nervous system and muscle cells. We're transporting carbon dioxide away from the cells to the lungs. We're transporting nutrients from the digestive system to the cells of the body. We're transporting wastes from the cells of the body to the liver and kidneys. We're transporting hormones from their endocrine gland, where they were produced, to their target cells. And so those hormones are going throughout the body in the blood. The blood and vascular system is also providing protection by moving antibodies and molecules involved with the immune system. The blood is regulating temperature, pH, and ion concentrations, along with help from other organ systems. When we're looking at the cardiovascular system, it's easy to consider how it relates to the other systems of the body. For example, respiratory system. That one's easy, right? Respiratory is providing the oxygen and carrying away the carbon dioxide. Digestive system is providing the nutrients. The liver is considered part of the digestive, and it's also producing some of the proteins that are found in the blood. Kidneys, of course, are adjusting the concentrations of many different molecules within the blood. And of course, the blood is providing those nutrients to the muscles, to the nervous system, to the bones. The bones are also producing the blood cells. So this system is really interlinked with all the other body systems. So let's keep that in mind as we go along from this chapter to future chapters. Blood vessels are the arteries, veins, and capillaries. In this case, we see some veins on the surface of the arm, but most of the blood vessels are deep to the surface. They're farther in from the surface. Arteries and veins. As blood leaves the heart, it's leaving in arteries. We can remember that arteries away, both starting with A, arteries away. So whether we're in the pulmonary circuit or the systemic circuit, it's arteries that are leaving the heart. We'll talk more about those circuits in a minute. So in the systemic circuit, the arteries that are leaving the heart have oxygenated blood. In the pulmonary circuit, the arteries that are leaving the heart have deoxygenated or low oxygen blood, and they're going to the lungs. And we'll talk about that more as we go along. From the arteries, we go to arterioles, which are small arteries. Then we have the capillaries, where gas exchange takes place. As the blood comes out of the capillaries, it's going into venules, which are little tiny veins, and then into the veins, and then back to the heart. In this illustration, we can see the difference between the veins and arteries. So this larger blood vessel, this is a cross-section of two blood vessels. The vein is very loose. It's wider. We don't have a thick wall. Where in the artery, we have a thick wall and we have some structure. The arteries are carrying blood that's under high pressure. It's leaving the heart. It's under high pressure, and so it needs this thick wall. When we're returning from the body or from the lungs, the blood in the veins is at lower pressure, and so this is larger. We'll talk more about that as we go along. In this illustration, we can see the left axillary artery, left axillary artery. So that may seem like a lot of words, but remember that word axillary from our talk about regions of the body. So the armpit is axial. If that doesn't make sense, think of a plant, right? In a plant, we've got a stem and a leaf coming off here. This bud is an axial bud, right? So that's kind of a little armpit of the plant. So this is axial area. So this is the axial artery. So remember, those regional terms are going to help as we learn the arteries, some of the bones, the lobes of the brain, the nerves, and so forth. So here we have the heart. Oxygenated blood leaving the heart is coming in the aorta and going out into these different large arteries. And here it's coming out to the left axial artery. This is just random that I chose this one of the illustrations. So start by learning the larger arteries and then work your way down. This is just one example of a nice big artery. The superior vena cava is a large vein. It's one of the largest veins, and so it's bringing deoxygenated blood from the arms and the head, right? And that's coming to the left atrium. We'll talk more about these large blood vessels and the heart itself in another mini lecture. This is an example of a large vein. Here's another right brachiocephalic vein. Right brachiocephalic. So again, remember, as we're looking at this model, think of it as the patient. So this is on your left side, but it's on the right side of this patient. Brachiocephalic is referring to the arm and the head. So here we have blood draining back from the arm and back from the head. And so just this little part is called the brachiocephalic vein, even though it's quite short. Our first look at the two circuits. We've got the pulmonary circuit, they're calling it circulation, and the systemic circuit, or systemic circulation. The pulmonary circuit takes deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs and back. The systemic circuit takes high oxygen blood from the heart out to the body and back. We'll have another closer look at these two systems. Make sure that you understand them. So, structure of the blood vessels. Arteries and veins share the same general features, but the walls of the arteries are much thicker because of the high blood pressure. So when that ventricle of the heart squeezes, it's putting that blood under high pressure. So the aorta that's taking blood from the left ventricle under high pressure is extra strong. When you're doing a dissection, you can tell which is the aorta because the wall is thicker. So here we have a look at an artery and a vein. That one has a little bit thicker wall than the one we looked at earlier. Notice also that there's kind of a wiggliness in that artery. There's some elasticity in that artery. All right, what are some other things? We've got layers. Get used to the layers. There's going to be plenty of them. We've got the tunica externa, that's the outer layer, tunica media, middle layer, and tunica intima. So this is just the artery wall. The entire artery is going to be larger than this. Here would be the lumen, right? And here was the lumen, and that's where the blood is. We've got some smooth muscle there in the tunica media. We've got an internal elastic membrane. That's what we're seeing in this wiggliness in the artery, is that elasticity. Now, here's an interesting word, vasa vasorum. Vasa vasorum. These are little tiny blood vessels. So vasa vasorum is the vessels of the vessels. So we actually have a blood supply in the larger arteries to the smooth muscle. All right. We've got an external membrane. We've got some nerves. We've got an endothelium on the inner lining, and that's to keep that smooth so that there's no friction as the blood flows through. And then we also have our elastic fibers in that tunica media. All right. In the vein, we don't require that much strength because the blood pressure is going to be lower. Right? So again, we have the tunica externa, tunica media, tunica intima. We still have some vasa vasorum, and we've got a little bit of smooth muscle and the endothelium. Right? These illustrations were taken with a light micrograph, and they were stained. The tissue was stained so that we can see it. Right? This is not the red of red blood cells. It was a chemical stain to show up those tissues so we can visualize them under the light microscope. They would just look kind of very pale and difficult to see if they weren't stained. There's another better look. There's our elastic artery. You can see this in some of the illustrations that you'll find on the UC San Diego MedPix. You can see this elastic artery, right? So there you see your tunica externa, tunica media, tunica intima, and of course remember this is a cutaway, so this would be going all the way around. And in here is the lumen. Lumen is the hole. We also will use that term in some other body systems, including the digestive system. All right. So there we had an elastic artery. Here we have a muscular artery. And then we get down to arteriole. We still have a little bit of elasticity there, and the arteriole is going to be smaller and coming up to the capillary. So we're going smaller, smaller, smaller. Okay. Be sure to review this in the book. When we get to the capillaries where our gas exchange occurs, we have some slight differences. We've got a continuous with some little clefts. So this is just basically one cell layer, right? One endothelial cell layer. There's our nucleus, right? There's a little space between those cells. And we've got a basement membrane just to hold things in place. We've got fenestrations, which means just the little holes, right? So this is going to allow for plenty of exchange. And here we have a sinusoid. Oid, when you see that oid, that means in the shape of something. For example, a humanoid robot is a robot made to look in the shape of a human. So in this is very porous. You can think of it as kind of some Swiss cheese. We've got an intracellular gap, this incomplete membrane that's going to allow for even more exchange of fluids. Question 1. I'm going to give you the question here. The answers are multiple choice, and they're going to be found in your lecture quiz. So what you want to do is write down this question, and then when you get to that set of answers on the lecture quiz, you can select the correct answers. So the question is, the heart has blank AV valves and blank semilunar valves. I'm looking for a number in both cases. The heart has how many AV valves and how many semilunar valves? Okay? So you'll find those answers in a multiple choice form in the quiz on the Canvas. All right, we're continuing now with capillaries. This represents a capillary bed, and we can change the amount of blood flow through this capillary bed. Notice these little precapillary sphincters, and there are many sphincters within the body, and that controls how much blood flows from the arteriole into the capillary bed. We have a thoroughfare channel that just lets the blood come on through to the venule if these capillary beds are closed, right? Also called meta-arteriole. serving as a vascular shunt, right? So just letting the blood flow through quickly. Imagine that we're working out a muscle, right, and using more oxygen. Then we're going to open up the flow into the capillary beds, right? And here we have an anastomosis, arteriovenous anastomosis, just a pretty large blood vessel connecting those two sections. Okay. And there is a comparison of veins and venules. Many of the veins have valves to prevent the backflow of blood, particularly in our legs. Venules do not have these valves. So remember that in the veins, the blood is at low pressure. So to move it back, we're using the movement of muscles in the body. And the valves are directing the flow. So as our calf muscle squeezes, it pushes blood up, and then the valves don't allow that blood to come back down. As we age, those valves can dysfunction, and that can be a function of age, genetics, and so forth. And so that leads to blood pooling in the feet. All right. The venule is measured in micrometers or micrometers, and compared to millimeters for veins. So a millimeter is something that's visible, right? There is our large vein. We have our three layers, the externa, the media, tunica intima. We've got some smooth muscle in the tunica externa. Now remember, we're going to talk more about smooth muscle, but that's under involuntary control. So here we're seeing several types of tissue. Then our medium-sized vein, we see that valve, right? So that valve is only going to allow blood flow in one direction, towards the heart, right? And then once the blood is up in this chamber and the muscles relax, it will press these valves down and not flow back. And then the venule is thinner. We've just got a thin tunica externa, media, and intima. All right, that is our last slide of the mini lecture on veins and arteries.